Welcome to Staples.
Hi, Staples guy. I need school supplies for my kids, and I can't spend a lot.
With Staples' 110% price match guarantee for back to school, find an item for less, and we'll match the price and give you 10% of the difference.
So I'll get the lowest price on backpacks?
Yes.
Notebooks?
Mm-hmm.
Calculators?
You bet.
Even?
Yep.
Nice.
Make low prices happen. Make 110% ready happen. Staples. Make more happen.
Price match plus the 10% difference discount valid at checkout for items from retailers operating online and retail stores or products sold and shipped by Amazon. Valid through 9/19/15. See store or staples.com for details.
Blog Talk Radio.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's broadcast of Tap Into the Truth. With you as always, this is your host, Tim Tapp, and I do hope you are having a fantastic day wherever you are and whatever you may be doing, unless, of course, you're engaged in global jihad. In that case, I hope you're not having a good day because, well, you're a bad person. At any rate, welcome to today's show, and with us today, we're absolutely jam-packed with the expected guests. We're scheduled to have Michael Maharrey, the National Communication Director for the 10th Amendment Center and author of Our Last Hope, Rediscovering the Lost Path to Liberty. He should be joining us here shortly. And then later in the second hour, we're scheduled to have with us Dr. William Briggs, Adjunct Professor of Statistics at Cornell, and a gentleman who has spent some time looking at climate change. And we're going to have a discussion about that in the second hour, talking about the models and the way things have transpired. Also hoping to have an extra bonus guest in the second hour. We'll see how that plays out as well. In the meanwhile, we're waiting for Mr. Maharrey to join us, and I believe he actually is coming online right now. So let's go ahead and get started. Mr. Maharrey, how are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing really well, thanks. First of all, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for giving it part of your Sunday to join us and talk about things that you're doing, things that the 10th Amendment Center is doing. First and foremost, for the folks who may not be familiar, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about the 10th Amendment Center.
Sure. The 10th Amendment Center is an organization that is primarily focused on holding to the original meaning of the Constitution and the original limits of power that were intended to be applied to the federal government. And this is laid out very nicely in the 10th Amendment, which essentially says that any power that was not delegated to the federal government remains with the states and the people. So anything that you don't find in that list of powers in Article 1, Section 8, or the few other powers scattered throughout the Constitution, those things were actually meant to be left to the states and to the people, not to the federal government. Of course, today we have a federal government that does virtually anything and everything, and so our goal at the 10th Amendment Center is to roll that power back and bring it back into what the founders actually intended.
Now, as a result of your efforts, a lot of what you guys do is education to the general public. Unfortunately, we have a public school system that has not done a particularly good job of letting people know what's in the Constitution, what isn't. What can you do, what can't. I've heard a lot of discussion, especially after the recent opinions that were released by the Supreme Court, a lot more talk about nullification. You guys at the 10th Amendment Center are big proponents of nullification, correct?
Well, absolutely, and you're right. We do our work basically focuses in two directions. We do a lot of education, and you're absolutely right. There's so much ignorance and so much. And when I say ignorance, I don't really necessarily mean that as it kind of has a mean connotation, but it's just It's just a fact of life. People aren't taught the founding principles. They aren't taught what the Constitution was meant. So we spend a lot of time just doing that. We write a lot of articles on, founding principles, on what the ratifiers and those that were involved in bringing the Constitution into existence, what they said. The other part of our work focuses on activism, and we use this process called nullification. And for those of you who've never heard the word, and there's probably some out there going, what are these guys talking about? Nullification is basically, as we define it, any action that's taken by a state that serves to nullify, in effect, an act or a law or a action of the federal government that is outside the bounds of the Constitution. So a lot of what we focus on now is really what we call nullification in practice. So, we're not saying that we're changing the law or anything, but we're having the states or pushing the states to do things that will, in effect, make these federal actions not work. So it nullifies them and makes them stop. And, I'll give you an example which ties right into one of the recent Supreme Court opinions, and I like the way you called it an opinion because that's all it is. But in the realm of Obamacare, I think a lot of people now are going, oh, my gosh, what are we going to do? They were counting on the Supreme Court to rule in our favor. And, of course, I didn't expect that at all because the federal government almost always protects the federal government, and the Supreme Court's part of the federal government. So the ruling didn't surprise me. But it leaves you wondering, what can we do? I mean, I don't really think that we can count on Mitch McConnell to repeal it, and the term is repeal and replace, and I would contend that replace isn't the right thing to do either. It's not a federal issue. So what do? Well, states can do one thing simply by not doing anything. They can refuse to cooperate, refuse to do anything to implement the Obamacare program. They can just basically say, federal government, you want to have an Obamacare system, implement it yourself. Well, they don't have the resources to do it. They don't have the people. There are a number of things in the legislation itself that makes it vulnerable and needs state cooperation. So by simply not doing anything, the states have the power, if enough, basically make the whole thing collapse and essentially repeal it in effect.
Well, in the case of Obamacare in particular, we saw several states actually do exactly that. They didn't set up exchanges. The most recent opinion was a way of saying the federal government could take steps to overcome that. Are there other issues, though? Is there other things that we can do specifically at an activist level to push our state legislators to take a more specific role, like legislation within the state to actually counteract the federal government's efforts, or is that a step too far?
No, absolutely. There are things that we can do. And actually, this last legislative session, Arizona kind of gave us the blueprint. The Arizona legislature passed a fantastic piece of legislation, and essentially what it does is it prohibits the state from providing any personnel or any resources or any enforcement mechanisms that would help to or have any input into implementing or running the Obamacare system in the state of Arizona. Where this becomes particularly interesting is the fact that Obamacare has all of these mandates within it that require insurance to contain specific things. We've probably heard a lot about the birth control and things like this, or the provision in it that requires that insurance cover people, children, quote unquote, until the age of 26. All of these are federal mandates. Well, who enforces insurance regulations? It's the insurance commissioners in the states. Under this new law that Arizona's passed, the insurance commissioner in the state of Arizona will no longer lift a finger to enforce or do anything at all to deal with these federal mandates. So, if an insurance company was to say, drop your kid when he turned 25, and you're saying, oh, no, the law says 26. Well, they would normally go to the insurance commissioner, and the insurance commissioner would investigate and enforce this particular provision. Well, that's not going to happen in Arizona, so I don't really know who the people are going to call because there is no federal insurance commissioner. There is no mechanism for the federal government to enforce their own mandates. They count on the states to do it. In Arizona, this won't happen. This is extremely significant. There's other provisions in this law, too, and I would encourage anybody to go over to the 10th Amendment Center website and go to our our reading blog section. You just Google, or not Google, but search in there Arizona Obamacare, and you can pull up a great article that explains all of the specific provisions and the impact that it will have on implementation of Obamacare in Arizona.
Okay. Well, as just a simple point, I want to make it very clear here because, again, I know there's still a lot of confusion about nullification. I hear some people actually try and make the argument, of course, these are typically leftists, by the way, try to make the argument that it's actually illegal, although they tend to support nullification in cases like with the sanctuary city, for example, that is a form of nullification.
Absolutely.
But actually would be illegal because immigration is something that does fall under the purview of the federal government.
Well, I think there's two different ways that you can look at nullification, and this is something that in the last couple of years we've tried to make people understand and help people understand. I mean, that sounds kind of hard-handed there, but to help people understand exactly what types of avenues nullification can take. And there's basically two, and they're kind of hinge on the two different definitions of nullification. There's a nullification in a legal sense, and it essentially means to make it void legally. So, if a court rules that a contract is no longer in effect, it nullifies the contract. It's legally binding. The contract is no longer part of the law. Now, I contend that state legislatures, state governments, the people of the states have every right to take this type of action. And so did Jefferson. Jefferson said that the nullification of a law is the rightful remedy. But virtually nobody in the legal world believes this anymore. It's again a result of how far we've actually strayed from our original constitutional roots, and it's why we spend so much time writing about this and trying to explain to people exactly what the founding generation meant when they set up the federal government and how they meant those federal powers to be delegated and how they meant them to be checked. And I'm going to do a shameless plug here. I've actually written a full book about nullification called Our Last Hope, Rediscovering the Lost Path to Liberty, and people can find that on the 10th Amendment Center website. So that's my shameless plug for this show. But there's another thing that we can do where there is no legal debate whatsoever. And this actually follows the prescription that James Madison gave us in Federalist 46. And, of course, this was an issue during the ratification period. People were asking, you're telling us that we've got this federal government, and this federal government's going to have limited power. So how does it stay limited? And Madison said that there is a remedy that is powerful and at hand. And basically what he said is that the states could take action, and among those actions were refusal to cooperate with officers of the Union. And it's interesting, if you read Federalist 46, he talks about unwarranted powers. So if the federal government exercises unwarranted powers, the states can take these actions. But then he actually said, or even warranted powers that happen to be unpopular. So Madison held that the people of a state could look at something that the federal government was doing, and if it was vastly unpopular in that state, they could say, you know what, we don't really want to have anything to do with this. Now, that's not saying that they can go out and call up the militia to stop the federal government from enforcing it. But notice what he said. He said refusal to cooperate with officers of the Union. Now, that's exactly what I'm talking about with the Arizona Obamacare law. They don't do anything to actually, try to physically stop the federal government from implementing it or operating the system. But what they do say is we're not going to cooperate. We're not going to take any action. We're not going to take any steps. We're not going to be part of this whatsoever. Do it yourself. This is actually something that the Supreme Court has held is perfectly legitimate, even if it's constitutional. So even if the Supreme Court says, this Obamacare is constitutional, which you and I are probably going to agree is absolutely ridiculous, it still doesn't mean that the states have to lift a finger to do it. And it's the same thing with the sanctuary cities. And I understand that probably a lot of your listeners are going to get a little tense about this, but the fact of the matter is there's nothing that says that the states have to enforce federal immigration law. The feds have to do it themselves. So that is essentially the mechanism that we've been using at the 10th Amendment Center. Instead of trying to engage in this legal debate that we're going to lose every time because of the way the system is evolved, we're simply finding ways that the state can refuse cooperation and stop federal implementation because they don't have the manpower, they don't have the resources to do it themselves. And there's all kinds of